Hello and welcome to the AI table. We have a very special guest with us today, Sune, and we have agreed that I'm not going to even try to pronounce his last name, so he's going to do it for me. Sune, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, dear, and thank you for having me. My name is Sune Selsbæk-Reitz. I know it's a difficult name, but it's a mix of, Danish, Norwegian, German. I live just outside of Copenhagen in Denmark with my wife and my two children. And professionally, I work with data and AI strategy. And I spend a lot of my time thinking about how organizations use technology to make decisions, create knowledge, and shape the way people work. I have never really approached technology as just technology. My background is in history and philosophy from University of Copenhagen. And before I worked with data and AI, I also wrote poetry and fiction. So I probably come into this field with a slightly strange combination of interest, system, language, ethics, source criticisms, and very human habit of believing that what sounds convincing must be right. And I have just released my first nonfiction book.
Yeah, yes, and I'm glad you mentioned the book. It is called Promptism. I highly recommend it. I'll include links to the book when we post this. So let's dig right in. Let's start off with talking about promptism. So you coined the term promptism. Can you talk to us a little bit about what promptism is and why you think it's important?
Yes, of course. Promptism is my word for this cultural habit. I think we are that is beginning to form around generative AI. It is the habit of treating fluent machine generated language if it was already understanding, or at least that is close enough. You ask a system a question, and within seconds you are getting back something clear, structured, calm, and confident. It sounds like knowledge. It often looked like knowledge, and because it arrives so smoothly, we may stop asking the slower questions like, where did this come from? What is missing? What assumptions are hidden in here? Do I actually understand this, or have I just received a well-written answer? That is promptism to me. It's not about prompts in itself, and it's not just about an AI tool. It's more about what is happening to us when the answers becomes too easy. I think it's very important because a lot of the current AI conversation out there is focused on what these systems can actually do. Can they write? Can they summarize? Can they analyze? Can they optimize and automate? And those are all relevant questions in my book, of course, but I'm more curious about what they are actually doing to us, the people using the systems.
That is very fascinating, and I know all of us that have interacted with these systems have, of course, had a situation where we've asked it a question and we've received an answer, and that answer wasn't necessarily true. So, in your book, you talk about the risks of AI undermining critical thinking, but others obviously tend to see it as a way to amplify human cognition, handling mundane tasks, surfacing new perspectives, or improving how we frame our questions. How can we harness AI's potential to enhance our thinking while avoiding some of the pitfalls that come with over reliance on it?
Well, I think that is exactly the right tension here, because I do not think AI is only a threat to thinking. That will be too simple and frankly not very useful to have that mindset. AI can absolutely help us think. It can help us explore topics, test our arguments, find alternative framing, summarize some material, or give us a starting point when the page is painfully blank. To me, the question is not whether we should use it or not. We will use it regardless. The question in my mind is where in the thinking process we will allow it to enter. For me, the problem begins when AI becomes the first and sometimes the only thinker in the room. If I ask it to frame the issue before I have even struggled with the issues myself, then the answer can become somewhat of an anchor. It gives me categories, language, structure, even priorities. And if I later revise that answer, I may still be thinking inside of that frame it gave me. But if I, on the other hand, use AI after I've done some of my thinking myself, it can be more valuable. Then I can actually asking what I am I missing? And what would a critic say to my argument? Can you give me three counter interpretations? Where is my own argumentation weak? What assumption do I make within my argumentation? That's to me is a more healthier use. It's an AI as a sparring partner and not just a substitute for my own judgment.
Understood. Understood. I think it could be challenging to make that switch because a lot of us currently are just focused on speed, speed, speed. And it sounds like what you're encouraging us to do is in order for it to be most effective usage to slow down a little bit and also to, approach it thoughtfully and perhaps a new order of operations and how we're using it, where we're starting with ourselves first, the machine second. So your book really drives home the point that fluency is not the same as understanding. So we can understand what this really looks like in the real world. Could you give an example of the most striking instance where AI's fluency masked a lack of truth or meaning that you've seen?
Yeah, you just had that example the other week with the consultancy firm A. Like A was one of the example that stayed out to me in recent months, where they were creating a professional report from scratch. And the reason why it stayed with me was not that it was hallucinating or anything, but it was that it looks like it was trained on trust. It had a sales title, a fancy logo, market figures, footnotes, confident language, the whole visual grammar of, you can say, institutional knowledge. And then people start checking it. They were going into the report, and some of the references did not hold up. There were inconsistent in the figures. Some citation pointed to non-existent directions. At least one reference appeared to not appear at all. So to me, that is a perfect example of the problem, because the problem here, in my mind, is not that AI can make things up. We all know that AI can do that. But the more interesting thing here is that they are making things up in shape of something that looks like knowledge. It can produce something that looks research. It can imitate the tone of expertise. It can wrap uncertainty in both formatting, structure, and professional confidence. And then we are shifting the burden over to the reader, because we are not just readers anymore. We are in need to audit what the output is. We have to ask, does this source even exist? Does this footnote actually support the claim? Where does these numbers come from? And that is where fluency becomes dangerous, because it sometimes looks messy. We become alert, but if something looks more polished, we tend to relax. And AI is very good at this polished output.
Yes, I agree. My career, I got into data from a research background. And so it's that research part is particularly interesting to me because it was exciting when these tools were released, the potential that they had to ease the burden of research. However, I noticed what you're saying. And I think that it's easy to see it when we see a fake citation. There have been several companies in the news for that. We've also been seeing it where these fake citations have been entering the court system, where lawyers are filing briefs and referencing studies that don't exist or whatnot. But I think where it's harder to catch is what you're going even deeper and talking about is when the reference is there and it's an actual real life reference. But what if the context in which it was given by the AI doesn't map to the argument that you're trying to make in the paper? That's a little harder to catch because you got to do work. You have to do intellectual work with that. It's not just a matter of a quick, let me double check that this book exists or this article exists. You have to really engage with the source
You read the source
material
material
to
yourself.
say, yes, is this accurate? Does this make sense? Is it logically consistent? I think it's our human nature that we don't wanna do that.
No,
Yeah.
no, we are a very lazy species that is just energy preserving all the time. So of course we will skip corners if we can. It's natural.
So when we're going about our lives and let's say we're using it in that way, we wanna use AI, we're writing a research report. Walk me through the best practice from your view of what that process should look like.
I think
We
we
could,
need some more rehabilitation to doubt a little bit more. In many organizations, doubt is mostly treated as inefficiency. We like decisiveness. We like speed. We like clear answers. And now we have systems that can give us these clear answers instantly. But doubt, in my mind, is not the enemy of good work. I strongly believe that doubt is often what protects good work. It is the small pause before we are accepting something. It's the uncomfortable question in the meeting, the people who says, wait, how do we know this? Or what source is this based on? I don't see these as annoying questions. To me, they are functional as quality control in some fact.
quality
So
control, yeah.
so on an individual level, on you and me, I think people need some simple habits, never just accepting the first answer model give you as the final answer. We need to ask the system for the assumptions, ask what it is missing, ask for counter arguments. Whenever the output matters, we need to go back to the source material. And on a more organizational level, we need to make that behavior legitimate. If the culture only rewards speed, people will use AI for speed. But if the culture also reward judgment, people will use AI more carefully, I believe. And perhaps more importantly, people should be allowed to slow things down, even when things feels too smooth. Because this is often where I see this promptism begins. It's not when the answer is obviously wrong or anything, but is when it's so fluent that no one feels the need to actually question it or going a step deeper. So I will say that we need to cultivate doubt as a professional discipline. It's a discipline of a habit of staying with a question just a little bit longer.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think it's a challenge, but I think that we should be up to that challenge. One of the positives I can see with slowing down and being more thoughtful with how we interact with the systems is that I think long term, it helps to establish more trust. People who interact with AI and maybe they don't do it a ton, but they've experienced hallucinations or what have you. I've run across a lot of people who just throw the baby out with the bathwater and they just say, forget the whole thing. It's pointless. But I think you're taking a middle ground and really showing us that the tools are still useful, but in order for them to be maximally useful, we have to be intentional about how we're using them and how we're reviewing the outputs. So my next question, because a lot of our listeners are leaders within companies that are tackling AI implementation, can you talk for that part of our audience about practical steps that companies can take to train employees to engage critically with AI tools?
Yeah, of course. And I completely understand why business leaders around the globe are attracted to this efficiency argument, this efficiency tool that AI is presented as. AI can make certain tasks faster. It can, of course, summarize, drafting, classify, compare, extract, translate, and help people move through information much more quickly. And in many organizations, that is generally valuable. The mistake is to think that it's then wonderful, but if it helps people find relevant information faster, also great. But if it remove unnecessary friction, I'm all for it. But there is also, you can say, necessary friction. Source criticism is a friction. Reviewing an argument is friction. Asking whether an answer is actually supported by evidence is friction. Having a colleague challenge your conclusion is also friction. And if we remove all of that in the name of efficiency, we may become faster of producing weaker decisions. So I think leaders need to distinguish between tasks and where speed is the goal and tasks where judgment is the goal. If the task is low risk, repetitive, then automate as much as it makes sense. To me, it's fine. But if the task influence, you can say strategy, the customer, employees, compliance, ethics, or important business decision, then AI should not be treated as a shortcut around thinking. To me, it should actually be treated just as an input. kind of like your colleagues have inputs to your work. It means building source criticism into your workflow, not adding it as an afterword or a sticker afterwards. So the real productivity gain is not just doing more work in less time. It is using AI to free up our human attention to the part of work where human judgment actually matters. That is the balance I think we should aim for. We should automate the mundane, but protect the meaningful stuff.
Yeah, I think that could ultimately be a serious source of competitive advantage for firms who understand that balance and understand the strategic advantage of what you just described there. So, your book's subtitle includes the words, The Fight for Meaning in the Age of AI. What does this fight look like, and who are the key players?
It's also a little bold subtitle, but I don't think the fight for meaning is a grand battle between humans and machine. It is much more ordinary than that. It happens in the small moments when someone received an AI generated answer and decided not to pause and read, really read it. It happens when a student asks whether the summary actually capture the text, when an employee check the sources behind a confident claim, when a leader refused to treat a polished slide as the same thing as an insight, and when a teacher says, "Yeah, you may have used a tool, but you still have to explain your thinking process behind it." That is the fight for meaning, because meaning is not just information. Meaning is, in my book, what happens when we interpret information, connect it to a context, test it against experience, and takes responsibility for what we do with it. It can generate language, it can produce pattern, it can offer possibilities, but it doesn't care for the words it's producing. It does not stand behind them. It does not do anything on its own stake. But we are responsible, we as humans. So the key players are not just the AI companies producing these large language models, although they carry a very large responsibility, but it's also governments, educators, business leaders. It's the designers, the managers, parents like myself, it's journalists and knowledge worker. Basically, it's everyone who helps shapes the condition under which people are thinking. But I will also like to say that the key player is the individual reader, the individual user using these machines. It's the person sitting in front of the output, because promptism doesn't only happen at the level at technology. It's also happening in the moment where we are deciding whether a fluent answer is enough. So the fight for meaning is partly institutional, yes, but it's also about regulation, design, education, governance, and responsible AI development.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. If our leaders could take one action after reading Promptism or listening to this episode, what would you like it to be?
One action. I will ask them to pause before accepting a fluent answer. When an AI gives you something that sounds clear and convincing, please ask it just one more question. It could be, what is missing? Where does this claim come from? Or do I really understand? Or does it just sound right? We need that pause. That is important. Promptism doesn't begin when we are using AI. It begins when we are stopping participating in thinking. So use the tools, but don't let the fluency end the conversation.
Thank you so much for being on. We really enjoyed you, and you gave us a lot to think about. And again, I will link the book so everyone can go out and get it. I have a copy. It was excellent. I highly recommend it. Thank you so much, Suna.
Thank you, dear, and thank you for having me.